Welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. We are on limited time, but we have one story, and it's really only one story, and oddly enough, it's one of those times where not doing a super long show actually kind of fits the bill because the only story in town right now happens to be a very important one that came out from over at The Athletic, and I've already seen there's been some pushback, and there's some pushback from the family of said player, but we have to get into what happened with Nick Castellanos and the Philadelphia Phillies, what led to the divorce between the player who once signed a five-year, $100 million contract between that guy who signed it and the team that signed him to it. Total disaster class. And there are so many ways to look at it, but what we're going to do here on the show today is kind of parse through what happened, why it happened, who's actually to blame. Because believe it or not, I don't think it's as linear, and I don't think it's quite as clear as the story that came out made it sound. I think that there are some legitimate gripes to have with the player. I would argue that there are legitimate gripes to have with the organization as well. We're going to get into that in a little bit. I've seen the comment section filling up, so I'll try to get to as many as I can here. We're going to probably wrap this, around 4 o'clock. So we'll see how this goes. It'll be a short show today. Now, the Phillies let go of, cut, waived, whatever, Nick Castellanos. This was one of the least shocking developments to happen in a very long time. Because candidly, we've all known for months the Phillies had no interest in bringing back Nick Castellanos. And if you were here on this show, on the stream, on Wednesday, I broke down Dave Dombrowski's comments. Because in the midst of all of this, in the midst of this entire mess around Nick Castellanos, this is before a lot of the things came out in Matt Gelb's story over for The Athletic, which we are going to get to in a second. I said on Wednesday, it is a total disaster class by a front office to let it be known for months on end, if not a full calendar year, that your team actively wants to move on from a player. It gets rid of so much of the potential value of that player on the market. Now listen, there are a couple of ways to look at this. I'm going to make a cross-sport comparison. If you remember, there was a time that I would decry the decisions that John Tortorella was making in some of his player personnel decisions, where it was like, all right, you don't like Morgan Frost, you don't like Joel Farabee. If you don't play them, it is actively going to hurt their trade value on the open market. It just will. And I had people who would come back, including people who cover the team, were like, it doesn't really matter. And then I talked to a front office executive and said, hey, if your head coach were sitting players that you're actively trying to trade, does that help or hurt the value? They said it hurts the value. It has to. Because then the other front offices ask, why is the coach not playing the players? What are we not seeing? What are we missing? And they might not ask the executive of the team who's trying to trade the player. They might use back channels. The executive might reach out to another person who's affiliated with that organization. Maybe they reach out to an agent. Maybe that agent talks to some of their players that they represent on that team. And no matter what, the word's going to get back. Dombrowski failed on the easiest part of this that he had the ability to control. Because listen, it's entirely possible, right, that at some point last year, the Miami incident, as it's been dubbed, was well known. Now, it wasn't as very well known to all of us. It wasn't known to the people who don't cover the team. It wasn't known to the fans who pay money to go see this team, or the people who follow them on social media, or the people who watch associated clips or whatever on social media, right? Those people didn't seem to have all the details about this quote-unquote Miami incident. But I'll tell you what, there's a non-zero chance that incident got back to other players, obviously, and that those players may or may not have told some of their agents and or family members and or other players on other teams in the midst of, what happened with Castellanos? Why isn't he playing? Could have been something as simple as a staffer, somebody who was around the team, somebody who's working in the stadium who says, you wouldn't believe Nick Castellanos took a beer into the dugout. Can you believe it? How crazy is that? Word gets around. So I'm not going to act as though Dave Dombrowski shoulders all the blame here. But for a year, this team made it very well known. We don't want this guy. We are actively looking for a new home for him. And then over the course of last year, I said this was after the trade deadline, right? And it was going into the postseason. And then once the postseason was over, the offseason, winter meetings and everything, when the national media people started saying, well, the Phillies are willing to eat $15 million, $16 million, $17, $18, maybe even $19 million of the deal, That's where Dave Dombrowski has to come out and say, yo, we like Nick Castellanos. We think that he's been one of our best postseason performers. Low bar, admittedly, but we have no intention of moving him unless the team really comes to us with a great offer. You lie. You publicly lie. It's what executives in pro sports do. They lie. They lie about whether they like the player or not. They're trying to make sure that at least from the front facing out to the public, that those people are under the impression the organization still likes the guy, believes in the guy, thinks that he's valuable. Now, whatever's being said behind the scenes is a different story. But like this team screwed this up, okay? Castellanos is his own message. We're going to get to here in a second. We're going to get into Gelb's story. And like Castellanos is by no means without fault. Sounds like a douchebag, okay? He does. He sounds like a grade A or a grade D doucher. He does. Which isn't surprising because unless you were just like sucked in by, oh, he's dreamy. Oh, he seems like such a, oh, I love his quippy answers. I love how quick he is. I love his quick wit. Unless you're one of those people, you probably at some point are like, yo, he's kind of a dick. Okay, cool. So now that we're on the same page, Gelb's reporting certainly makes it sound like dude is kind of a dick. And at the same time, it's hard because you have to try to square up and do the mental math here. If Castellanos was as bad of a teammate as Gelb kind of made it sound like via anonymous players and executives and people associated with the team, if he's really that much of a dick, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that when at the same time that when the Phillies season ended in the playoffs and Ryan Kerkering made a bad decision in the moment and panicked and went home with the throw, the first player to come out to him and wrap his arm around Ryan Kerkering, take him off the field and say, it's going to be okay, was Nick Castellanos. The dichotomy of man. We're going to get into the Gelb story, right? Because the Gelb story certainly makes it sound like players had they'd had enough of Nick Castellanos. And then in the organization, they had enough of Castellanos. But man, it is hard because like you do look at some of the anecdotal stuff and like, here's where I've landed. We're going to get to the Gelb thing. Here's where I've landed. Nick Castellanos probably didn't actually want to be a Philadelphia Philly. That comes out in the reporting. Nick Castellanos tried to make the best of a situation. That changed almost instantly. Nick Castellanos, ultimately, as a player, was probably a pretty selfish player. As a teammate, was an up and down teammate. As a human being, still displayed empathy in his final action as a member of the Philadelphia Phillies, putting his arm around Ryan Kerkering in his lowest professional moment and telling him it was going to be okay. This is maybe one of the most complicated player stories that we have had in this city in a very long time. Typically, it's black or white. Guy was an asshole to his teammates, asshole to the staff, asshole to everybody. Dude's an asshole. Guy was really good to his teammates, well-liked person, everybody liked him, good dude. Most recently, Jared McCain. No one had a negative thing to say from the organization about Jared McCain. This is why the fans are so upset that Jared McCain is gone, because he was so highly thought of. But when you've had a guy before who is viewed to be a jackass, when they're gone, you're happy they're gone. When Papelbon was gone, you were kind of happy Papelbon was gone. Castellanos is a little bit more of a complicated force. So we're going to get into it. So here's what we saw. The Phillies failed to make a move. And we talked about it on Wednesday. Dave Dombrowski throwing out there that, trying to make a move. The question was asked, what happens if you can't make a move before the players report? And he's like, we think we'll make a move by then. Well, they did. So Nick Castellanos is no longer a member of the Philadelphia Phillies, which then led to a story over at The Athletic by Matt Gelb. Matt Gelb is as plugged in as any Phillies writer can be, right? The story, how the Phillies' $100 million marriage with Nick Castellanos ended in divorce. I would highly recommend that if you haven't done so already, you go read the story. If you're not a subscriber to The Athletic, you could choose if you want to subscribe or not. I'm not going to tell you that you absolutely have to. I'm also not going to tell you that you shouldn't. If you want to subscribe to it, you certainly can. Now, I'm giving the page view right now. I'm on the story right now. There are a whole bunch of things that were obviously alarming. And, the first paragraph of the story, and we're going to kind of break this thing down. The first paragraph of the story kind of tells you everything you needed to know about just how bad things got at the end here with Nick Castellanos and the Philadelphia Phillies. The beginning of the end for Nick Castellanos' time in Philadelphia came on the night when the $100 million outfielder cracked open a Presidente beer and carried the green bottle into the Phillies dugout in the middle of a game. It was a Monday in June in the 8th inning, and Castellanos believed he had been disrespected at the highest level. So, I don't care where you fall. I don't care where you fall on what is okay and what is not okay. Did he drink the beer? Did he not take a sip of the beer? As a player, as a $20 million a year player, as somebody who was brought in here to be a difference maker, along with Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper and JT Realmuto and Trey Turner, you have a certain level of expectation. When it comes to you being a veteran who's played in the league, and there are young guys on that team, there is a level of expectation that you are going to act like a responsible veteran. Taking a beer into the dugout during a game is not a professional move. I don't care how frustrated as a human being you were. I don't care how frustrated as a player you were. Walking into the dugout with a beer during a game is an ultimate show of disrespect, not just to your manager, who later on in the story we find out he did not like, to the hitting coach, who he did not like. It is disrespectful to the rest of the players. It is disrespectful to the organization. And he is incredibly lucky that a video camera, of which there are many in a stadium, did not catch him with a beer in the middle of a game in the dugout. He violated a Major League Baseball rule. You cannot have alcohol in the dugout. No shit. That is an inexcusable thing. Now, is that enough to rise to the level of cutting the guy on the spot? I would actually argue that they probably should have, but we'll get into that in a second. Castellanos not only goes into the dugout, reportedly, right? He got pulled for defensive purposes, but they were playing against the Marlins, and he had family and friends in attendance, and he felt like being pulled in that game or from that game was the ultimate disrespect to have that done in front of his family and friends in his hometown. And he apparently yelled at coaches, and he yelled at Rob Thompson, while I'm sure his teammates just stood there wondering, what the hell is he doing? So he brought the beer into the dugout and then chews out his manager, chews out other coaches. And apparently, Schwarber and Realmuto, neither of whom were on the field at the time, had to intervene. So think about the position that he put himself in. He takes a beer into the dugout. He's chewing out his manager. He's chewing out the coaches. And now Schwarber and Realmuto have to somehow diffuse the situation, or try to diffuse the situation. And it also mentions that Howie Kendrick is the one who apparently got the beer out of Castellanos' hand. This sounds like a scene from the Jerry Springer Show. And no, it was during a Major League Baseball game, because Nick Castellanos, who isn't a good defensive outfielder, was pulled in a 2-run game against a team within the Phillies division, and he was pulled because he's not a good defensive outfielder. And Rob Thompson thought that it gave them a better chance to win the game. And Castellanos got his feelings hurt, so he took a beer in. Okay, not great. Not great. Now, Gelb's report also says that before this even happened, there were players that had already kind of soured on Castellanos. Now, was it specifically because he was pretty much a replacement level player? Is it because he was one of the worst outfielders in Major League Baseball for a time in his final season with the Phillies? Maybe. But could it also have just been that his teammates felt like this guy is a lot to deal with and isn't exactly delivering in the way that we need him to? Maybe. I think the second that you take a beer into the dugout, you've lost the plot. I do. I know that some people might think that it's an overrating of the situation, it's blowing it out of proportion. I think that when you reach that point in your mind where that is an acceptable thing to do, you clearly have no respect for the coaching staff, and I think that you disrespect the organization at that point and your teammates. Now, among all these other things that came up, one of the Phillies' anonymous players was quoted as saying, quote, "You can't disrespect the manager and talk to him the way he did. You can't expect it to all be the same after that." Now, remind you, this was in June, right? So there were still many months to go in the season. And there was another story, another part of this story, which was also kind of interesting and sort of weird, right? And Anthony, if you didn't listen to Phightin Words today, I'd suggest you go listen to Phightin Words over where you get your podcasts, or on the YouTube channel and on the Joy Media YouTube channel. But Anthony Sanfilippo kind of floated this idea because there was a thing about how Castellanos' son apparently was in the clubhouse before games. And Anthony kind of revealed that that's not the only kid. That's not the only player's kid who had been in the clubhouse at some point. Does that mean before games? Does that mean after games? Whatever. There was mention of the fact that, like, before one of the games that the Phillies played against the Dodgers, JT Realmuto wanted to get in batting practice and instead, like, waited off to the side while Castellanos' son took batting practice, which makes no sense. I mean, I don't know what to make of that. Like, no offense to anybody, right? I have kids. I love my kids. My kids don't belong in my workplace, right? Like, they don't. And if it's an off day and guys are doing batting practice at, like, Citizens Bank Park, all right, who cares? Fine. But, like, before a playoff game against the Dodgers, a series that everyone had to lock in for, the idea that, like, Realmuto had to wait off on the side to take batting practice because Castellanos' kid was taking, that seems a little bit weird, doesn't it? I feel like that feels a little bit weird. And in the story, I'll bring this part up. In the story, this is what I'm kind of highlighting. Gelb put out, here's the paragraph. About 4 hours before Game 2 of last year's NLDS, Castellanos' final home game, a Phillies coach threw batting practice to Liam, that's Castellanos' son, while some Dodgers players were on the field doing pregame preparations. Realmuto waited to take early batting practice. Why? The same pregame hitting sessions carried over to Dodger Stadium, where his son joined his father on the field before more playoff games. The Phillies had entered the series not expecting Castellanos to be a factor. An injury to Bader forced him into action. Castellanos had 2 hits and 15 at-bats. Okay, again, let me ask the question. Why does your kid need to take batting practice? We all love our kids. If you have kids, you love your kids. You love your kids when they do good things. You love your kids when they do bad things. You might not like their decisions in the moment. You still love your kid. Why is your kid taking batting practice? And listen, on a human level, I'd be like, hey, that's very cool. Good dad move. Not before the playoffs. And that would then lead me to ask, if you're working for the Phillies, how do you allow this to happen? Like, how does it get to the point where you're like, yeah, one of our players' kids is taking batting practice and that gets priority over one of our players who is expected to be a big part of the series, JT Realmuto. He's kind of an important hitter in that lineup. That to me is crazy. I don't know what we're doing. Truly. I don't know what we're doing. Seems crazy. Okay. The beer incident's bad. I think the batting practice thing is also pretty freaking bad. I know that some people are going to think, like, again, I'm looking at it as a parent, right? I think it's awesome. If you reach the pinnacle of your sport and your kid can go out and take batting practice, on an off day, awesome. You want to show up like 7 hours early to the stadium and your kid wants to take batting practice, cool. But the second that one of your teammates comes out to take batting practice, kid's got to go. No offense. Got to go. What are we doing? Now, Castellanos put out 2 statements. He hand wrote them, which I thought was actually pretty clever. You don't see that anymore. You see people take pictures of, the Notes app. They take a screenshot of the Notes app on their iPhone and they put that out. But in this case, that wasn't what happened. Castellanos hand wrote his notes and he wrote some stuff thanking Philadelphia. And then in one of the paragraphs, he kind of like tried to remind the Philly fans that they ultimately have to decide for themselves what's true and what's not to feed into the media narrative, whatever the media is trying to tell you, like that kind of stuff, which is fine. It's well. And then he gave his side of the Miami incident. Now, I kind of gave you the overview of what Gelb's reporting around the incident was. But here's something that I thought was interesting. Dave Dombrowski, who I started the show talking about, was also asked about it. And Dave Dombrowski had very clearly read the handwritten letters that Nick Castellanos posted to Instagram. I mean, there was no doubt about it. Dombrowski had the opportunity to check them out. There's a quote out there from Dave. And Dave very clearly felt like this was a situation they could not pull the nose up on. So we're going to go out to a quote here, and I want to kind of loop back in on this really quickly. Because again, macro view on this, I think the Phillies screwed up their messaging for a year. I think Castellanos screwed up on a few levels as a professional. Let's go out to Dave Dombrowski. This was on the decision to let go Nick Castellanos.
Officially released the contract of Nick Castellanos.
I got no
sound today. We've spent
me?
a prolonged time trying to make a trade, and when I say that,
Somebody let me know if you can hear it. Can you guys hear this?
Minimum return from a dollar perspective and player perspective, but just hasn't worked out. And at some point, you just have to say, well, this isn't going to work. We have felt that we need to get a change of scenery for Nick, and wish him nothing but the best. He did a lot of good things for our organization. He was here for 4 years. We won every year he was here. Got a lot of big hits for us and a lot of big hits in the postseason. So wish him nothing but the best, except, of course, when he's playing the Phillies. And, yeah, so that was the news for today. I don't know that there's one specific. I know that a lot's being said about this incident in Miami. I don't think it's necessarily one incident. I think you just sometimes are in a situation when you're around day in and day out. You just, things just don't work at a particular time. This isn't the first time. I mean, I think normally what ends up happening, Nick's been a very good player. He's had a nice career. And he probably will continue to do things very well. But a lot of times when a good player has their role change with the club, it can cause some friction.
This was the thing that Phightin Words brought up today. It's that Castellanos expected, I guess, to play left field and then some days at DH. Once Harper got hurt, he got thrust into being a right fielder. He wasn't a right fielder, and that might have been the thing that really threw him for a loop. We'll continue.
And his role changed last year from where it was.
And then, of course, last year, he really did become like a platoon player. Castellanos found himself out of the lineup a lot more than he expected.
I mean, he played every single day for a lot of years in a row. And so sometimes that can contribute to it. Sometimes then people have debates between themselves where they're not all on the same page. But when you put all that together, sometimes you just need to make sure that you have a change of scenery. So
it all comes down to change of scenery in the mind of Dave Dombrowski. Here's the issue that I have, right? He's out there once again saying that he thought what they were asking for in terms of a financials, right? Maybe a team pays $1 million, maybe they give a prospect, that it just wasn't going to work, and he felt like there needed to be a change of scenery, and all that's fair. But the thing that I thought was really weird is the Miami thing. And because I couldn't hear it, I don't actually know for a fact if he addressed it in this clip or not. So I don't think he did. The Miami incident came up, and there is a clip floating out there, and if I could find it in time, I will. But Dombrowski essentially said that he didn't want to address the Miami incident, due in large part to the fact that it was 7 months ago, and that thing has already happened, and it's already done and dusted, and he doesn't want to go back and relive that. He doesn't want to go back and talk about it. And then he does eventually bring up the fact in that clip that Castellanos, he doesn't want to be the one to speculate whether or not he brought it into the dugout during a game. And then he was reminded by the media, it did say in the thing that he brought it into the dugout. Here we go. I got it. Here we go. Here's the clip. Here we go. All right, we're going to go over to this real quick. Here's Dombrowski on the Miami incident.
Well, I'm not. That was 7 months ago. So
there you go.
A long time ago. We spoke about it at the time. We addressed it at the time. Rob Thompson and I did it with Nick. I was surprised. I mean, I was there at the game, and I watched everything from where I was sitting, and I was surprised that a lot of people didn't see what was taking place.
That's why I said they're lucky that the cameras didn't catch this.
I watched what took place. Of course, was advised. Now I'm not in the dugout, so I wasn't 100% sure of every step of the way. But that contributed, by all means, why he was suspended for that game or taken out of the lineup for that game, bench for the game.
Interesting that he caught himself saying suspended, but then taken out of the lineup for a game.
It was a situation that wasn't the final or determining factor, because if that was, we would have done that at that particular time. So.
So there were other incidents of some variety that they had also taken note of.
Just for the record, though, because he put out a statement, was that during the game or was that after the game when he brought a beer and sat next to Rob?
Well, I'm going to let others speak to that. I think that was.
You're the president. You should be answering that.
Put it out.
Well, I'm sure if what he wrote, then you probably would need to ask him about that. But it was a long time ago. But when if that's what he said that he brought it in the dugout during the game, then I would say that would be accurate.
Well, no, I don't.
Well, so
specify it was during the game.
So there you go.
Didn't you sure? I thought it said it was during the game. Okay.
So whether Dave wanted to say it or not, he confirmed that it was during the game. Here's the problem that I have. This is just a blanket statement for executives in sports. You might not want to have to answer the question. You might not want to have to answer it, but deflecting and saying, I'm going to let other people, you're the president of the team. It is your job to address it. Who would you like to have address it? Do you want Rob Thompson to have to address the situation? Do you want Kevin Long to address the situation? Do you want Howie Kendrick to address the situation? Do you want Schwarber and Real Muto to have to talk to the media about whether or not Nick Castellanos took a beer into the dugout? Boy, I'll tell you what, it sure would be a shame if, like, as things are just getting started, you put one of your star players who you just signed to a really long extension. Be a shame if, like, one of the first questions he had to ask or answer coming back to the team was about Nick Castellanos and whether or not he was a distraction. Be a real shame if that kind of thing happened because, Dave doesn't want to have to answer the question because he's the president of the team. It's a little bit too hard for him to answer. Good thing that they didn't have to, ask, I don't know, maybe Kyle Schwarber today if Nick Castellanos was a distraction.
Do you think the situation with Nick last year was a distraction at all?
I mean, that's here nor there. I mean, it's we did what we did, right? I felt like that in the Dodgers series that we played good games, right? Like there were just things that we didn't execute.
And like here's Schwarber trying to be a good dude and be a good teammate.
So it's hard to
talking about the Dodgers series,
there, right? Like we put ourselves in the position to where we wanted to be, and we just got knocked out. So can't really say.
So Schwarber, in his first day back, has to answer questions about whether or not Nick Castellanos was a distraction and whether the incident was a distraction. That is a failure. That is an organizational failure. I will use an old term. That is organizational malpractice. To allow for this to go on as long as the Phillies did without making a move, without releasing Nick Castellanos, they put all of this negative spotlight on their team as their players are reporting to camp. That is organizational malpractice. They had to have known a month ago, nobody's going to bite on Nick Castellanos. They had to know a week ago, nobody's going to bite on Nick Castellanos. Don't make the move as pitchers and catchers are reporting and some of your players are going to be coming into camp. This is the worst possible time for this to come out. It's the worst possible time for Matt Gelb's story to come out. It's the worst possible time to have Kyle Schwarber have to answer questions. You're trying to wash your hands of a bad situation where clearly the player didn't want to be here. Clearly the team didn't want him here. And now you're starting the 2026 season with all this negative publicity about something that happened last year. That is a failure. And what's the most frustrating and perplexing about it is it's happening with somebody who many believe is going to be a baseball Hall of Famer as an executive in Dave Dombrowski. This is not a first year or second year or fifth year executive. This is a president of your team who bungled this for months. Now, eventually, this will subside. We'll see if Castellanos gets picked up by another team. John Heyman threw out that there are going to be a bunch of teams interested now that he's free and clear. This was a failure by the organization. It should not have happened this long. It should not have lasted this long. And it should not be overshadowing the start of your players reporting to camp. This is a disaster. And it's such an easily avoidable one. This is one of those unforced errors. It's an unforced publicity error. This is an unforced error of epic proportions in terms of PR, and it could have been easily avoided because ultimately the Phillies end up with nothing. They end up with a $20 million bill for a guy to not play for them. A guy who, yes, had humanity, put his arm around Ryan Kirkring and told him everything was going to be okay. But also a guy who reportedly would play music on his own personal speaker after he had a good game, even if the Phillies lost. A guy who decided at some point that he was so out on being on this team, not that he was ever really in, because he also reportedly begged his agency to find another $100 million offer from literally anyone else before he officially signed with Philadelphia. The guy who maybe didn't actually ever really want to be here decided that he was so out on this team, on this organization, on this coaching staff, that he thought it was okay to take a beer into the dugout and chew out his manager during a game for making a defensive move that was ultimately the right call. And that is where we're going to leave it. We wish Nick Castellanos the best in his future endeavors. I have no idea where they'll be. Maybe he'll get to go play in obscurity in front of his hometown fans in Miami. The Phillies are effectively better off without him, and he will certainly be better off from a mental health perspective, if nothing else, outside of Philadelphia. I will tell you that while his letters were initially pretty well received, I would think, by the fan base, this report coming out the way that it did makes me think that when he does return to Philadelphia, he is going to see a lot of negative things. He is going to hear a lot of boos. We'll see what happens. I'll be back on Monday. We'll recap NBA All-Star Weekend. We'll talk about what's going on in the Olympics. We'll talk about any updates from Phillies camp. Maybe there'll be some Eagles news. Maybe we'll get good news. Maybe we'll find out that Landon Dickerson isn't going to retire. We got the Lane Johnson news earlier in the week that he's not retiring. Maybe we'll get some good news. But we will be back on Monday. Until then, this has been the Russ Joy Show, and I've been Russ Joy, but you knew that already because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. Go subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel. We're getting very close to 2,000 subscribers. Episode number 200 is on Monday. It would be nice to celebrate 2,000 subscribers on episode 200. Only you can help. And I know that it's President's Day. If you think President's Day is going to stop me from doing a show, then you don't know the Russ Joy Show. All right, I'll talk to all of you Monday here on the Russ Joy Show. Bye now.